All right, guys, so I graduated from Texas A&M University, so I'm going to start this off here with a howdy. I'm going to get a howdy back. There we go. That's what I like to hear. All righty, guys, so I'm going to talk about IPM today. So who here knows what IPM stands for?
Integrated Pest Management.
There we go. Boom. All right, so Integrated Pest Management. So what are some things that we would consider to be pests?
Everything that eats in my garden.
Everything that eats anything in your garden.
My garden when we're not there.
There we go. So would you count the sun as being a pest? Would you count the wind as being a pest? Or maybe the soil type you have as being a pest? All of these little things you got to bring together and think about whenever you get your garden planted and all that stuff. That's why.
But our problem is the dog come walking through the.
Hey, there you go. Or that southeast wind.
It looks like a cow walking where you plant.
And so all of those things we call cultural pests. Those are all going to be things that are abiotic factors like soil type, all that kind of stuff like that. And then you got biotic factors like your dog and the bugs that are coming in to eat all of your plants and all of the fungus and bacteria and all the other fungi, the oomycetes that are coming in. So this right here we talked about just a second ago, the tobacco mosaic virus. And we talked about being a soil-borne illness. Is there another way, though, that this can be spread? Does anyone know one other way you can give your tomatoes tobacco mosaic virus? And it has to do with tobacco. You have you ever gone out in the garden and smoked a cigarette while you're pruning your plants or anything like that? That cigarette right there, when you get that contact with the nicotine on your fingers, that virus that causes this disease right here can transfer from your fingertips into the plant material. And so if you're ever going to be working in your garden, make sure that you wash your hands after you're done smoking and then come out and work your garden, because otherwise you can get this just from touching your plants and if you're a smoker. All right, so that's one fun thing. And then the next up, we've got these calcium deficiency here, the blossom end rot. And so we talked about a few different ways to take care of that issue, but what's something that you could do to prevent that to happen in the first place? You got to get your soil tested. You got to send your lab results in, get it back, you find out, oh, wait a minute, my pH is too high, which means that my calcium and my magnesium, which is why we're adding Epsom salts to take care of this issue, aren't going to be available because they're only available below the pH of 7. And so knowing little details like that, knowing what nutrients are available at what pH range, and knowing all of those little things all come together to help prevent all of these different diseases and stuff from happening. And so the first thing first to keep all of this stuff going on is going to be you knowing what you're doing. And so there's like a couple of big pillars as far as integrated pest management is concerned, and the very first biggest one is going to be planting genetic varieties that have resistances to these kind of diseases and stuff. So you can go through and you can plant big boy tomatoes out in your lawn, and right next to them you can plant beefsteak. And if you've got something else we talked about earlier was the nematodes in your lawn, the big boy has a gene in it that actually prevents nematodes from latching onto its root nodules as easily. Whereas the beefsteak over here does not have that gene in it, and so all those nematodes are going to move over here and attack that plant rather than this one over here. So that very first step of just what you're putting in the ground is crucial to make sure that you get a crop that's going to give you healthy, good-looking produce. And so you get that covered. What's going to be next after you get the genetics covered? So how many of you guys here have lived in a place other than Texas? All right. And so where did you guys live? Louisiana. All right. And so, hey, there you go. That's a perfect one right there. So would you plant a tapioca plant in upstate New York? Probably not, because a tapioca plant is going to be tropical and it needs warmer weather above 50. And so that's another big thing that's going to come in is where did that genetic material that you have come from? Was it grown locally? Was these varieties produced at Texas A&M University, like those hot peppers and stuff, where they're used to the climate conditions, they're used to the diseases and pest pressures that we have in our area? Or did it come from New York or come from Oregon? A lot of those fruit trees you buy in the store are going to be shipped in from Oregon. And so they're going to be used to Oregon's pest pressures and Oregon's issues and all that kind of stuff like that. And so you'll notice that those trees don't do anywhere near as good as you'll go to feed stores and you'll see an American brand peach tree or something like that, and that guy is going to do better than the burpee shipped in from Costa Rica peach tree next to it. And so just little things like that make a big difference too as far as getting all this going. And then this guy right here, the tomato hornworm. So we had the advice of throwing it in your neighbor's yard, and that's a good one because everyone likes to upset their neighbors. But another way to kind of keep this guy from happening in the first place is going to be another major pillar in our steps to integrated pest management, and that's going to be biotic controls. And so this guy right here, we talked about that wasp that puts the eggs inside of its carcass, and then the larva will eat this guy. And so you don't ever have to come through, as long as you have those beneficial wasps in your garden, and kill this guy, because you'll have the wasps and you'll have your sparrows and all those other guys that kind of come through and eat them. And so because of that fact, then you shouldn't have to spray. You shouldn't have to whip your chemicals out and go through and spray your lawn, as long as you've got these guys under control with assisting organisms like ladybugs, all that kind of stuff like that. And then the last pillar on there is going to be you. You guys are the other cultural control with your hands. These guys right here are the best tools you will ever have in your entire life. Dexterity, and you can get, pinch little tiny leaves off up in there with just your fingers. So don't be afraid to get in there with your hands and take care of these issues too, because these right here are some of the best tools that you will ever have in your entire life. And so then after we get done with all that, these guys right here, same thing again, but these guys don't have a whole lot of predators, don't have a lot of pressure on them to get rid of them, which is why you see them everywhere. And so the way so we've gone through and we've planted the right variety, we've planted something that's from the area, we've also made sure that we've got our environmental conditions in the right condition to where our plants are perfect and healthy and we're getting great tomatoes, but now we have 1 million stink bugs coming in and attacking our tomatoes. And so the first step that most people go to is going to be spray. I'm going to come through my garden and I'm going to spray all of these bugs, and I'm going to take care of that issue right there. But the problem with that is that stink bugs, hornworms, aphids, all of these different guys develop resistances to these chemicals over time. Aphids, it only takes 8 generations for them to develop resistances to chemicals. And so what happens is, and also too, aphids have this fun thing where they're born bred, which means that an aphid can be born pregnant and have babies of its own right after it was born. And so their population can skyrocket through the roof. And so a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll come through, how many of you guys spray on a schedule? How many of you guys come through on a calendar and mark down, I spray this day, fungicides, insecticides, anything like that? Awesome. You guys are doing way better than everyone else already by not spraying on a schedule. And so now we've realized we have an issue. We've got this leaf-footed bug that's making our tomatoes hard and unedible. And we know that it's an issue now. We know the population has reached a point that it is going to damage our crop and damage our ability to use that produce. And so what we're going to do then is now we're going to come through with the very first thing. Again, we're going to go back to the biotic controls. We don't have any biotic controls for this guy, so we're going to move on from that topic. And we're going to go on to, okay, well, what are some cultural practices that I can do to remove these bugs from my garden? And that's where the tossing it in your neighbor's yard things come from. Him coming through with the weed blower and blowing it off. Well, that's all mechanical controls that are going to prevent you from having to use pesticides in your garden. But let's say we came through and we've blown them all off with the leaf blower and they keep coming back and they're still making you mad about what's going on here. And that's finally, at that point, that's where we need to decide, okay, now I'm going to spray. Now I'm going to come through and spray. And so when you do come through and spray, you need to make sure that you mix your pesticide at the correct amount. You need to make sure that you reapply after a couple of weeks. So like with aphids, how I said they're born bred, you can have a new generation of aphids coming out every 8 hours. And so when you come through and spray, you can kill off 90% of them, but that 10% that were hiding somewhere and they managed to sneak back their way onto the plant or something like that, they're going to continue to reproduce and continue to produce more aphids. And these aphids are going to be resistant to whatever you just sprayed because they lived through that the first time. And so then that's where, instead of coming through with the same chemical again and applying when you notice that the issue has come back again, come through with something different. Come through, and then the other thing too is start organic and make your way to conventional products. With aphids or leaf-footed bugs like this or anything like that, start off with spinosad soap, start off with Bacillus thuringiensis, start off with anything that's going to be OMRI certified, organic label or anything like that. Start there, because that most of the time is going to take care of your issues. Most of the time, we got to think about this more like we're all working together to get to our end goal. And if you happen to have a few stink bugs or a few aphids that happen to eat a few tomatoes, let them have that couple of tomatoes, because you know that your tomatoes you got were grown or healthily. There's no pesticides on them or anything like that at all. And so then only after you've gone through all those stages, then can you come through with the Armageddon, I'm going to nuke the whole garden, apocalypse chemical like malathion or anything like that. And so just little things to kind of think about as you're going through. And some other things that are kind of abiotic, kind of going back to the beginning here with the structure and all that, is right here. I remember he had a picture. Yeah. So aphids. So these guys, they have a specific stage in their life cycle where they can grow wings and they kind of fly off, and that's how they get from plant to plant. Now, some ways that you could come through culturally and prevent aphids from getting a foothold like this is, you see how this aphid, or this bean, I guess it is, yeah, bean plant right here, how it's doesn't have any tarp underneath it. There's a lot of moisture and a lot of this, basically this environment right here is conducive to bug growth and pest growth and disease growth and stuff like that. So if you can put a row cover down, that can help prevent some of that moisture from kind of hanging out in that plant zone right there or any kind of thing like that. And then so just little tiny steps to kind of come through and just do things to where you don't have some of the main issues. So like here. And so you look at this, you see the top of the hill is up over here maybe, and then down over here, there's like a wet spot right here. And you can see how like this corn over here looks a little bit taller than this corn right here. And so then that's another abiotic factor right there that's affecting the growth of the plants that you're using without, you don't think about it a whole lot, but then you go out there and you notice, wait a minute, the oxygen levels in this area is nowhere near as good as this. And so little tiny factors like that is also pest management, because if this plant starts getting stressed out, this is the one that the bugs are going to come and affect, not these guys over here. Because your immune system, it's like how your mom used to tell you, don't go out when it's cold outside with a scarf on because you're going to catch a cold. You don't actually catch a cold from the cold. You catch a cold from the bacteria, but your immune system is compromised when you're hanging out in the cold and your body's shivering and you're doing everything you can to stay warm and to stay alive. And it's the same thing with these plants here. If they're having to sit there and shiver and fight constantly to just barely hang in there and stay alive, then they're going to do way worse when it comes to pests and disease than something that's just happily growing and doing just fine. So that's going to be abiotic factors. And the other thing, like wind, we were talking about too. Talking about the corn, planting your corn to where you've got that southeasterly wind going up your row crops and all that stuff like that, and rotating that right there, that's a cultural practice you can do to prevent a lot of diseases or a lot of death of your plants without having to spray or do any sort of like extra fertilization or anything like that. And something else to do too is you come through and like plant pampas grass, that big tall with a big floofy tops on it. Plant pampas grass or something all along right here if you have to plant your rows north-south, and then that pampas grass will act as a wind block and prevent a lot of desiccation from going on in your plants. And then so this guy right here, this is a major issue that happens with a lot of different pests and your crops that you're going to go through. You're going to have like with cucurbits, that little borer that goes down into the vine, right? And you can't reach him with your insecticides because he's inside the plant, not on top of it. And so anything that you use that's a contact kill isn't going to reach that guy. So what are some, you got to find some cultural practices or some ways to prevent these from happening in the first place. So like with this corn right here, what we did, we were talking about the breeding and all that. These guys right here, the triple sweets, we talked about them getting the glyphosate resistance. They also have Bacillus thuringiensis, which is the Bt chemical which kills worms. And you'll notice that this is caused by a worm right here. And so these corn plants that have been genetically, so we're going back to that first thing again, planting the genetic material that's appropriate